You are entitled to food, clothing, shelter, and medical attention. Anything else that you get is a privilege.
Amen.
That was Alcatraz Regulation number 5. It's very true and dear to my heart. This is Jen.
This is Becky.
And this is Too Close to Home. And we're going to talk about a brief history of Alcatraz. So originally this started out as I was going to say, oh, this is the ghost of Alcatraz. And then I started going through and I'm like, well, you need to have context, of course. So let's talk about history, which is one of my favies.
Same.
And then I was like, well, you can't talk about favorites without really going into talking about the Birdman. So it's going to be a little bit of all today.
That sounds good to me.
And if you don't know about Alcatraz, I'm sorry. I'm not going to hit all the highlight reels. I suggest you do your own research. But I'm going to talk about some fun stuff today. Let's start with our sources, which is Medium, CBS San Francisco, Found San Francisco, Alcatraz Experience, Colorado State University Public and Environmental History Center, Wikipedia, National Park Service, and your host, Jen and Becky.
Personal experience.
So originally we were set to go to Savannah, Georgia, and then how life do. So we had to change plans, and then we had to figure out where were we going to go that wasn't hotter than Hades in May. And Jimmy found San Francisco. He's like, oh, well, we got Alcatraz. And then we realized Winchester was just a hot skip and a jump away, and we said, say less, fam. And there we were, flying halfway across the country. So the weather was gorgeous and cool in May, but I will tell you, no matter the season, the Fent zombies are a guarantee.
They are.
One of my favorite highlights from the trip was the big log of dookie that we saw on a windowsill that we all had to take, not a double, not a triple, but a quadruple take. Like, is that real?
Well, when I seen it, and it was only right to bring it to the rest of y'all's attention, so you could not unsee it either.
We're going to suffer together. It's called trauma bonding.
Exactly.
And so let's get started. We'll go ahead and start with how we ended up there. And you start off at navigating our... it wouldn't be right if I didn't do that.
It wouldn't.
As we navigated Fisherman's Wharf and its crowds, we ended up at Pier 33, Alcatraz Landing, where our journey would begin. The ferry ventures over the island several times a day, and as a tourist trip, there is only one company that is used by the National Park Service to dock there. Becky kindly informed me before I booked her tickets because I would have been the fool that didn't. And so we chose an evening trip with the full anticipation to be there for as much time as we could possibly be, and also see it possibly at dusk when, most of the spookies and spaghettis come out, right?
Exactly.
One thing we noticed was that the size of Alcatraz is utterly deceiving. You can see it from the pier, and you can recognize that's Alcatraz, but until you get out in that water and you're circling the island, that's when you realize how big it really was in the distance. It wasn't this little tiny old blip of an island. It's actually a big ass rock in the sea.
Accurate.
Thanks. As we came closer, it just really solidified to me how far out it would take for you to swim from the shore, or from an inmate's perspective, vice versa. So there's no wonder why so many people probably died in the water. And it was colder than tits.
And it is deceptively further away. So when you look, it doesn't look that far. But then there was a swimmer in the bay that we watched swim, and it was like he went nowhere. He just stayed in the same position. The currents are a lot rougher than you would think.
He was doing his best, and he was staying completely still.
Completely still.
He was better than me. I would have been already past the dock.
I wouldn't have gotten the water.
Not in the right direction either. Oh, yeah. Oh, but you know me. I'm always looking to die.
You are.
It's my faves. I'm surprised I didn't do it here. I was afraid I was going to, because as we came up to the island, I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to stay on this boat because there ain't no way my ass is going to make it up this tiny ass stair with nothing next to it up the side of this hill, because I'm scared of heights.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, oh no, this is it. I'm ruining everybody's trip. Everyone's going to feel bad and try to stay with me. And I would be like, no guys, go without me. But no, it really wasn't like that. Thank God we pulled up, and there was actually I would say a little road. It's probably a tiny private road's width, and it goes zigzag up a sheer cliffside. There's a lot of things to see along the way, from the dock all the way up to the rec yard. But as I go through the journey, I wanted to also tell you some of its complex history with what I saw. So the first visitors ever were the Native Americans, also known as the Ohlone. They gathered bird eggs and other natural items there, but they did not generally live on the island. Based on oral history, it appears that Alcatraz was used as a place of isolation and ostracization for tribal members. I did that really good.
You did. I'm proud of you.
Oh my God. Who had violated tribal law or taboo in an area for gathering foods, just like the birds and sea life and the eggs and all that jazz, and would also be utilized as a hiding place for many of the Ohlone who would be attempted to escape for the California mission system, which was pretty, tough on that population. This won't be the last time the island sees indigenous people, as its history is deeply ensconced in reclamation disputes for well over 100 years. But I mean, they were there first, so I don't know how you could argue that. And it's also really interesting, and both of us noticed right off the get-go, as you come up to the island, you'll see graffiti. And it's Native American graffiti from the occupations of Alcatraz in the 1960s to 70s. So it's a lot of history, all wrapped up within this little baby island. Big island? Big baby island? Big Rock Island. Anyways, first you pass through the Sally Port, and I know you know what a Sally Port is. But for those who don't know, a Sally Port is a secure entrance for inmate transport. You drive into like a garage, the door's shut on both sides, and then you can safely transport the inmate into the jail for intake. But Alcatraz's Sally Port is a little bit of a different story. Alcatraz begins its history not in the prison system, but as a military base. During Mexico's ownership of California, Pio Pico, which is the last Mexican governor of California, gave the land with the intention of the lighthouse being built by the Workman Temple family. But then in 1846, acting as his capacity of military governor of California, John C. Fremont, champion of Manifest Destiny and the leader of the Bear Flag Republic, bought the island for $5,000 in the name of the U.S. government. After that, in 1850, President Millard Fillmore, which is one of those presidents ain't nobody ever heard of, except for the one that he is a president, ordered that Alcatraz Island be set aside specifically for military purposes based upon the U.S. acquisition of California from Mexico. And do you know what Manifest Destiny is?
Mm-mm.
It was this whole ideal in that time that it's our destiny to manifest pretty much the United States. So it was like part of pushing out that expansion out west and going out and claiming all that property. It's Manifest Destiny. It also means displacing a shit ton of people who are indigenous to the area.
Sounds like what they did, exactly.
Go soup. So eventually, the Army Corps of Engineers would begin building what would become Fort Alcatraz, and the guard building at Sally Port that we walked through was built in that time period. It was later changed, and a boathouse that has since been removed was added in 1920 to help process the inmates. The first prisoners ever on the island were military prisoners and Hopi Native Americans in the late 1800s during the Civil War. This was where the strife would only begin for the island. As you travel up the hill, there's so much to look at, but little to fully explore, and many buildings are close to the public. We pass supporting parts of the prison, the storehouse, the power plant, the officers' club, the water tower, and then you reach the recreation yard.
We also passed the morgue.
Oh, yeah. We did pass its morgue, but it was extremely tiny and partially in ruin. It was almost missable except for the crowd of people that were up front, because you would think it's almost like a little store building, and then you see the morgue sign and you're like, oh! I did get some really cool photos that we will definitely post, and I'm sure you did too. Just through the glass, and you could see the table in the middle. Not creepy at all.
Mm-mm.
Would you lay on it?
Depends on how sleepy I was.
I see what I did there. By the time we reached the yard, despite being awed by the natural foliage of succulents and flowers and the cool air, I was out of breath and tired. I was willing to let a ghost take me right then and there.
It was a very long hike up. It was. All uphill.
For such a large prison, the recreation yard is as lacking as one would imagine. It's a concrete and chain link area, and the only frills one could speak of is this intense barring of the windows. Like, they got metal in the glass, over the glass, over the glass. Dog, I heard you like bars. I got them everywhere for you. So our first stop was intake for inmates, and that would be the showers and the room where the inmate uniforms and supplies were dispersed to inmates. And it felt more like a sanitarium, in my opinion. It's just 2 long lines of steel shower heads and pipes in a wide-ass open room with big-ass windows covered with bars. No privacy, 360-degree view at all times. 360 degrees, I'm pretty sure none of us wanted to see. You know what I mean? This comes to find out is below the cell block that we would be venturing into, and inmates would shower only twice a week. 3 times if they were working in the kitchen. So, perks. We lined up to get our little audio tour players and earphones, and before we knew it, we were in Times Square. Not the Times Square, it's featuring the naked cowboy, the prison one. And for those who aren't aware, they named hallways after major thoroughfares like Park Avenue, Broadway, and the Sunset Strip as almost a cruel joke, as most inmates in this prison probably never ever see these places. And some would never even leave. As we walked through the cell blocks and peered into the cells, it felt like a library. No ruckus or laughing, just shuffling and whispering of tourists as they listen intently to their little recorders. This somewhat mimics what Alcatraz the prison would sound like at its beginning. Much like Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, it was a silent prison at first where inmates were not permitted to speak, really. And the funny thing is that how they got out of that eventually was like everybody's in the mess hall. One person starts talking and then another person. And by then, everybody starts talking. What you going to do? Isolate all of us? You got enough isolate yourselves. Say less. I'll be talking now. Thank you. That's exactly how we would take over a prison.
Exactly.
We got to be quiet? Nah. We taking this bitch over.
I got a lot to say.
Did I feel ghosts? Well, I wouldn't say I got the heebie-jeebies per se, but there were a few times that I did feel off. The first time was hearing the National Park Service rangers open and shut the doors of the cells, just like that loud clanging and banging and the slight hum of human activity was just unsettling for some reason. I'm sure that's what many inmates experienced at one time or another. And actually, Jimmy will be inserting a recording here of those very doors. Insert it here, Jimmy.
It's funny the different feelings that people get. You got a slight feeling of uneasiness. I got a feeling of nostalgia from all the years I worked there. It's like, oh, listen to the sound of those clank clanks. Oh, brings me back.
Makes me feel so safe. So the second part where I fell off was the isolation cells. I wasn't sure at first if I was even going to write about our visit or not. Nothing too extreme had happened other than climbing what I felt was my own personal Kilimanjaro.
Same girl, same.
To get to a cell block building until we got to the isolation cells. And so isolation cells are often seen in blocks by themselves and are often portrayed as being physically isolated from the rest of the building. These were at the forefront of the cell block. A small row of short boxes. I'm 5'5", and I felt like I had to crouch to get in. I had to wait for my turn as these cells are quite narrow and extremely dark, but once I was in, I was all by myself, and the room just felt cold. I could hear everything outside alive and moving, but inside that cell, I was the only living thing. It felt as if I entered a room of someone who hated me with every fiber of their being and that their eyes gazed a hole through me. Thankfully, Jimmy arrived, and he's far more susceptible to possession because he's non-confrontational, so I'm safe.
One of the most accurate descriptions of a human you've ever given.
So the isolation cells actually take place in cell block D. All the blocks kind of are similar except for this D, which is almost at an end, and it has those isolation blocks right out front. It is the most notoriously haunted sections of the prison. It was built much like the other blocks, but the Bureau of Prisons appointed extra money to invest in securing D after an escape attempt. There were quite a few, actually, 14 escape attempts that would be attempted. That was funny, wasn't it? Attempted by, oh yeah. There would be quite a few escapes, 14 to be exact, but this would be the escape that resulted in the death of Doc Barker, the son of the infamous Ma Barker of the Public Enemy era of the 1930s. And so the D block became the treatment unit. This is probably where you would have been perusing a lot. It was like the medically insane. the infirm, those kind of folks.
My people.
Exactly why it would be haunted.
That's exactly why.
It's haunted by your delightful presence.
Thank you.
It became this treatment unit, and it had 42 cells of varying restrictions, and they will all be restricted from working. They were all banned from the mess hall, and they were only allowed the 2 showers like everybody else, but the 1 visit to the rec yard a week. And all those cells would face the Golden Gate Bridge, which would make the block unbearably cold. Even at times, they said that the prison guards would actually turn the temperature down to make it colder, to make it worse for them.
Well, that's not nice.
No, not cool, dog. Not cool at all. 5 of the cells would be called the strip cells, which is those that we spoke about. They went by their colloquial name, the hole. They were the very bottom, and they were reserved for the most serious rule breakers. Remember, if you break the rules, you go to prison. If you break prison rules, you go to Alcatraz. So if you were rule breakers of Alcatraz, that would be an indication of how seriously dangerous and possibly unstable these inmates could be. They were denied yard time. They were denied showers. They weren't even allowed reading materials. Sometimes they would even be in the dark. The guards had control over the individual lights in the cells, and they would leave them in the dark. You'd be in there solitarily with your thoughts and your company alone. And if you're a piece of shit person, it probably wouldn't be that best company.
Definitely not.
Why the bottom, though? Well, that was the coldest area of the cell block, and it would contain a toilet, a sink, and a single watt bulb. And they would have a mattress only at night. Every morning, they would take the mattresses away. So you'd be in a cold box by yourself on a cold-ass floor. These inmates would be subjected to these conditions up to 19 days. However, there is one cell at the very end that is the worst. Which cell did you go into?
I don't think I went into any of the confinement cells.
I went into the very first one. The one I'm about to talk about is the very last one and is the most haunted of all the cells.
I didn't go in there.
And I wish I had, but it's probably a good thing I didn't. It was nicknamed the Oriental, which is not awful at all. It would be the most severe punishment. The inmates would be placed in there naked in the complete darkness. There was no sink. There was no toilet. There was a hole in the floor for human waste. They would be on a restricted diet and would have their mattress taken away during the day just as well. And they would also have no showers and no yard time. And due to its severity, they would only put inmates in there for 1 or 2 days. I can't imagine how many people probably lost their fucking mind. This cell block has reports of a ghostly inmate in 1800s of prison attire. Guards treated the sightings by inmates as a practical joke, so when one particular evening in cell 14D, an inmate screamed in terror of a ghostly man with red eyes attacking him. They're all like, whatever. And then he stopped grinning, which was a win for everybody, right?
Of course.
Not for him, though. The next morning, they found him strangled with a look of terror on his face. The autopsy said that it was not self-inflicted, which left the guards under suspicion, and no guard would fess up, and nothing ever happened as a result. However, the screaming inmate's ghost was later reported as showing up for name call. When they realized there were one too many inmates, he would vanish. Spooky. Also, like, why wouldn't you ask him then? What happened? Was it a guard? Was it a demon? Was it a ghost from the prison's past?
We'll also, maybe your guards just don't know how to count. They used to fuck count up in the real prison all the time.
Listen, I need
but
2
I'm here
sets
for the
of hands.
Spookies, okay? So it was totally a ghost. That's why it was off.
I only got so many fingies, okay? What we do know is that 14D is often reported to be 20 degrees colder than the other cells, and there are reports of emotionally charged feelings in the strip cells and throughout Block D. And so, did you feel anything in Block D at all?
Nothing.
It's all right.
But again, been in that environment so much that
it was home.
Yeah.
Home away from home.
Sometimes I think some of the eerie feelings come on from prisons because if you've never been in a prison, you just get an eerie feeling walking into it, period.
True.
So sometimes I think the feeling is more from that than it is from something there.
That's an excellent point. Also, like the same thing with insane asylums. Many people will have never seen the inside of those.
Correct.
And thank God, also tuberculosis wards.
Because the first time I ever walked into a prison, working, and the clanking of the doors and the barbed wire and the people all over was very surreal feeling and very creepy. And then, just became whatever.
Yeah.
So I think some of it
became a Tuesday. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So after we went through the cell block, our audio equipment had to be returned, and we would venture out to the admin block of the building. We were both a little disappointed because this audio tour was literally only in the main building. That's it. And I can understand that the geography of the land might not make it as conducive to have a big audio tour. But even then, I think we were both expecting more.
I did thoroughly enjoy the audio tour. I thought the audio recording was very well done.
Mm-hmm. It was just a length, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But it was also really very informative.
It was.
And
I was
really
disappointed we didn't get to see more of the prison. You see a very limited area of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, all these buildings are closed. You have a lot of things closed off to the public. So after you get out of the admin block, you go outside, and there's the ruin of the warden's house, which is next to the lighthouse. The warden's house now lies in ruins. There was the Occupy Alcatraz movement in 1970, and the house was set on fire, and they did a bucket brigade, and they could not save it. So it went down in ruins. It was a third-floor mansion with over a dozen rooms overlooking the bay. So pretty sweet spot. It would host 4 wardens, and they would host lavish cocktail parties from time to time, which is a stark contrast to the experience of the inmates in Alcatraz.
Very different.
So let's talk about the Christmas ghost. No, not the ghost of Christmas, past, present, or future, but a ghost that once made a skeptical warden a true believer. The story starts on Wednesday evening, 1857, when there was just a lighthouse on the rock, and 3 of its inhabitants proceeded to take a small boat to shore from the island. But just like the bay is wont to do, the fog rolled in, and very quickly and densely at that. After rowing an hour and not reaching shore, they concluded they were lost and would very well be stuck in the boat overnight until the fog disappeared and the sun rose. One of the gentlemen, however, caught the beam of the lighthouse, and in a mad dash, the 3 men rowed quickly to shore, as it was said in the article from the Nevada Democrat. They congratulated themselves upon the prospect of speedily regaining land. And if that's not a man for you, congratulating himself.
Such a man.
But just like the others, the breakers on the rock shore would prove fatal. The boat would capsize, and while 2 men survived, the third, Michael Mann, was swept away and found dead on the shore next day. Well, what does that have to do with the warden? Well, this particular warden, James Johnston, was a seasoned pro, having previously run San Quentin and Folsom prisons, and he was well loved for his progressive outlook for using the prison system to actually rehabilitate inmates. And he was also a well-known skeptic of the supernatural and the claims at Alcatraz. So after becoming warden in the late 1930s, he, like the others, was known for his social events, and he would throw a annual Christmas party for the working population of Alcatraz. Then, every year it was fine until one year they would have a surprise visitor, a man who suddenly appeared with a black-brimmed hat, mutton chops, and a working-class gray suit from the Victorian era. It wasn't Jimmy.
Sounds very Jimmy.
Because suddenly the fire went out and a cold wave shocked the room as the man disappeared before their eyes. And some believe that soul was Michael Mann. Oh. It would make Warden Johnson a true believer once and for all, and the ruins of the warden's home is still known for its supernatural activity. The lighthouse has also been reportedly seen on foggy nights, sending an eerie green ray of light around the island. Was that the ominous light, that the same one that brought Michael Mann to his death? Ooh. So let's talk about notable inmates. It's just ping-ponging everywhere.
I'm here for it.
So you can't speak of prison without speaking on one of its most fundamental features, the inmates. And I want to speak about the notable ones. First, let's start off with the Birdman, okay? How much do you know about the Birdman? Because I actually didn't know that much.
I know he was a prisoner there, and I know that he, in like a Tesla sense, the birds became like his people.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot more to it. I believe there's a movie about him, if I'm not mistaken.
There is, and a novel. So you're pretty on par with how much I knew. And I actually didn't read that much into the Birdman before or while we were at Alcatraz. But once I started reading, I was like, oh, faux show. We got to talk about this. So one thing is certain about Alcatraz, that while humans have come and gone, the birds have nested on this rocky island shore for as long as there's been a shore to nest on. And this brings me to one of our most famous inmates on the island, Birdman of Alcatraz, Robert Stroud. So let's do a brief overview. He was born in 1890 out of wedlock. It was a quick and loveless wedding, as you would imagine. Not a good life, really. His father pretended he didn't exist for the first couple years. And then after that, the only affection was a backhand. So super sad. And then he had a brother named Marcus. Now, Marcus was his father's favorite. And he would become a vaudevillian magician, Marcus the Great. But he wasn't that much of a favorite because daddy went for milk and never came home. You know what I mean? So at 13, Stroud would quit school. And by 14, he was a pimp. Real quick, right?
Good for him. Drop out of school, but still made a career for himself.
Exactly. You could do a lot of things in the early 1900s. Okay. This will bring us to the crime that put him in prison, because he was in prison for the majority of his life. He left for Alaska in 1907, and by 1909, he was living in sin with a woman named Kate O'Brien. Kitty is what her friends called her. And she was a sex worker that he pimped. And this was in Juneau, Alaska. He also met up with a guy named Charlie Dahmer. His real name was F.K. Dahmer, but everybody called him Charlie. And he was from Russia, which very fitting for a bartender. I feel like he would throw down some drinks. You know what I mean? One night, Charlie roughed up Kitty, though. And Kitty went to the Birdman and said, please kill him, as I'm sure she wanted him to do. And so he's like, say less.
I got you, fam.
His father had said, if a woman is good enough to lay with, she's good enough to protect. So he walked
His daddy told him that?
Yeah.
Well, that was one good thing his dad instilled in him.
Only good thing.
Yeah.
So
there's probably a few more. You know, he taught him how to be a pimp. I mean,
you pimping at 14?
I'm trying to teach my boys that. Just kidding.
They stay pimping. You know what I mean?
It ain't easy.
It ain't easy. And so he walked into Charlie's house while he was asleep, shot him in the head, stole his wallet, walked to the police station, and turned himself in.
Well, now, why did he do that? Back then, they had very little techniques for collecting evidence.
I think he was proud of what he did. So he was like, y'all need to know
what I just done did.
Thinking like he's going to get out of this or something, right? So he ends up being arrested, of course, and he goes to trial. And then to add insult to injury, Kitty wasn't all that serious about Stroud because she testified against him to get out of prostitution charges.
Well, you know, there's a thin line, between love and protecting yourself.
And so he's portrayed as a calm and genuinely good man who found himself in jail, but that is not the truth. He was actually a grade A asshole. He was extremely violent and extremely unpredictable. Within 2 years, he had stabbed a fellow inmate who snitched on Stroud about drug trafficking, which, snitches do get stitches. I get that. And so he had a 12-year sentence to begin with. This only got him 6 months because the inmate didn't pass. And they transferred him to Leavenworth, which was at the time the last stop before Alcatraz. So as soon as he got to Leavenworth, he immediately planned to murder the warden and the head of the jailers. He's like, I don't like these motherfuckers and they gonna die. One time he claimed to say that he saved the head of the guards by not killing him.
Is it true? It's true.
He was saying what we always wanted to say. You know what I mean?
Makes sense, truth? No.
I saved your life by not killing you today.
I remind Jay that every night when he lays his little head down. You're only alive because of me.
Well, one day his brother came to visit and it wasn't visitation day. So he was denied rightfully. But the next day, Stroud finds out about it and he's pissed. And he's like, now I got to get fucking back at this prison. So he comes up with this plan. He walks up and he starts a casual conversation with the guard, which is a big no-no. You're not supposed to talk to the guards.
It's still like that. So
and
some things don't change. Oh, nostalgia again rushing over my body.
Right. And so nobody knows exactly what went down between the two, but they did say they heard Stroud at the end loudly go, what you gonna do about it? And then Stroud went over and was like, cow, and stabbed the shit out of him.
That's what I'm gonna do.
Right in his heart. And he died within minutes. He actually wrote to his father, proudly bragging about it later. He said the guard took ill. He had heart troubles.
Oh.
It's like, damn, that's a savage. The subsequent sentence for this murder would be death by hanging. But his mother was like super upset about it. And she was like, oh no, not my baby. And she begins a whole campaign to get the execution penalty taken off the table. Just give him life in prison. And she ends up reaching out to the president at the time. Oh no, I didn't write down what president it was.
It's okay.
It's one of those presidents, okay, that nobody remembers. Anyways,
United
I
States
digress.
of America.
His mother actually reached out to the president's wife and was like, I have paid for my son's legal defense with only my knitting. And it would be a sin for all that knitting to just go to waste.
I thought you were going to say something else you paid for it.
It was absolutely a lie because just like he's manipulative, that's where he got it from, was his mother. And so the president was like, all right, cool. We're going to stay this execution for life in prison. And then went on about his business. So when the judge came to change everything up, he said, oh, so we're going to not kill you. Okay, well, how about life imprisonment in complete solitary confinement? And he was given that sentence at 27 years old.
Yowza. I mean, good thing that, death was only like 40 then. So, I mean.
Yeah. It was really, he was on a ticking time bomb as we spoke, okay? Especially if you acted in the risky factors that at hand here. He was a pimp.
It's a good chance he had syphilis already.
And so before he was the Birdman at Alcatraz, he was the Birdman of Leavenworth first. He began with a couple baby sparrows that he found that fallen out of their nest in the yard. And he snuck them to his cell and he started to take care of them. Here's the thing. He actually knew nothing about birds. Nothing. This was purely I'm bored as shit. I'm in solitary the rest of my life. Let's fuck around with these birds and see what happens. Like, one of them died right off the bat. The other one, he was like, I see them always pecking around in the dirt, in the concrete and stuff. So he grabbed a handful of that and fed that to the bird. Somehow the bird survived. It flew off and he was like, oh my God, I'm Birdman.
Look at me. I'm basically a living, breathing Jesus Christ.
And so, like, he made most of his books and stuff are really made up experiments, like a throw shit at the wall.
Yeah, that's right. He wrote stuff about,
He was literally, he had to be like the Goebbels of avian, like the avian Goebbels. Like, I'm going to do these experiments in my bird death camp at Leavenworth.
I mean, in his defense, isn't all science that we just start somewhere and through our experiments and hypotheses, we come up with ways?
You know what? You're right. You're right.
He was really just practicing the scientific method. So
he really was. And he was very dedicated to it because his entire cell would be covered with birds. And what do birds do?
Shit all over the place.
Fucking and shit everywhere. You shit on this, they shit on that. They don't control their batters. That's just the way it is. There was so much bird shit. Birds started dying. There was bacteria.
His cell got really fucking nasty, right?
Yeah.
It was like coming back to me. I read something about him before.
Intense bacterial overgrowth. Birds kept dying.
For sure.
He also was like a hardcore cigarette smoker. So like he just chain smoking. So those birdies didn't have no breath of fresh air. not a little, nothing. And so he did have some interesting things that happen. He did come up with a basic bird antiseptic at the time when antiseptics were really fully understood within animals and stuff. So he began a cell business of bird medicine, bird feed, and bird novels. His second favorite hobby, though, which is something he also liked to write about, was he loved young boys. He was a pederast. He was a big old pedo. He loved them young boys. Those novels never made it off the ground, though.
No, they weren't on the Times bestseller list.
No. He also would gain a reputation as a wolf, which is a aggressive homosexual in prison that would victimize others. According to Donald Hurley, whose father was a guard at Alcatraz, quote, whenever Stroud was around anyone, which was seldom, he was watched very closely as prison officials were very aware to his overt homosexual tendencies.
So what you're telling me is when they saw him coming, they were like, he gonna take that ass.
He's gonna take that ass. He was angry, okay? But I digress. Back to the birds. He would end up with a collection of over 300 of them. So World War II comes rolling around and everybody signs up for the war effort, right? That led to a huge shortage of manpower within the prison system. So then the prison system's like, well, shit, what do we do? You know what? We need to start sending, separating some of these inmates to these other facilities and stuff. But Stroud, he's high profile. What are we going to do? Well, you know what? We're going to put him in Alcatraz. And they gave him 10 minutes to say goodbye to his birds and send him to Alcatraz.
Oh, that probably didn't go over well.
And this was
he had 300. You can't even say bye to each one individually and that.
Did not even give them all their little secret handshakes and stuff.
Nothing.
Apparently, he even taught birds tricks, and the warden would take people around, which I don't know why you would take people around to that nasty ass cell to begin with. I don't care if there's bird tricks. This is bird abuse.
Jennifer, it's called rehabilitation.
This also was in the area of freak shows, so
it was.
Buck empathy, right?
Y'all aren't gonna believe. You're not gonna believe me till you see this shit. Come look it. You're gonna lose your shit, man.
So, December 16th,
I want you to, first of all, stop playing. That if you worked there and you were the warden and people stopped by, that you would not take them by his cell. Stop playing.
Listen, you know how sensitive I am to smell. I would have made you, let me do it. They'd still see those bird tricks, but without me.
I would come over like, JJ, you're not going to believe this shit this guy's doing. For sure, it would be the first stop anytime someone came to visit me at work.
I really would hope that he would come up with a lot of cute names too,
I'm sure they were adorable. I'm sure. I can't imagine they weren't.
Oh, I don't know. That made me feel like, ugh. Oh, made me feel cross, like the things that probably went through that man's head, like, ugh. Anyways, December 16th, 1942, he became inmate 594 at Alcatraz. He would spend the first 6 years of the 17 he would spend at Alcatraz in a complete isolation, and then he would be moved to a medical block due to his health. In 1943...
Yeah, but he got some lung fungus from breathing in all that bird shit.
Amen. In 1943, he was assessed by psychiatrist Romney Ritchie, who diagnosed him as a psychopath with an IQ of 112. His initial IQ had been reported in 1942 as 116, which is slightly above average, weirdly. He was not physically strong, but he would remain dangerous because he knew how to incite riots with just words alone.
First of all, I'm not physically strong either, but I can incite riots in my house with my words alone. So
I've seen Emma riot.
Words are a powerful thing. Sometimes much more powerful than brute strength.
Exactly.
So if I can manipulate you into doing what I need you to do, isn't that the real strength?
That's the real strength.
Thank you.
That's real power. Okay.
I feel seen. Thank you.
That's thinking smarter, not harder, baby.
Right there. I'm just gonna sit on my throne over here.
So, since he had all this alone time, he decided he wanted to write an autobiography. And then he also gained permission from the warden of Alcatraz to write a history of the U.S. prison system, which he had to, interview other guards and inmates, give him some other people like FaceTime, right? Well, as time goes on, in 1955, Stroud was the subject of Thomas East Gaddis's acclaimed biography of Birdman of Alcatraz. While detailing the prisoner's violent behavior, the book also painted him as a man fighting to maintain his dignity while exceedingly difficult conditions. And this would later become a film starring Burt Lancaster, who would also portray Stroud as if he was like a Andy Dufresne from Shawshank, you know what I mean? He was a wrong man. He did a crime, but it was just a boo-boo, you know what I mean? It's not that big. That guy had it coming to him. But it wasn't like that. And in fact, did you know he didn't even have birds at Alcatraz?
Aw, that's sad.
He had all his stuff, his birds.
One glimmer of love and hope in his life.
Yeah, and I think that's why he went into like writing deeply after that. He was very depressed. He's by himself.
He lost all his children,
all his babies, all his little canaries, all 300 of them babies, all gone. Marcus the Great, the Magnificent. He had all the equipment. He lost his $8,000 a month income, which is what he was making. $8,000 in 1920s money at that.
Raising birds?
Yeah. A month.
What was he selling them?
Through catalogs. He actually ended up making friends with this girl who was also into birds, and they got married eventually, but she was like super fanatical about him. And so she would help facilitate that business.
How they even come across each other?
Through writing, because he would write and send articles out and stuff.
Oh, it's like random publishing newspapers and such. Because I'm like, there wasn't like online now.
You know that 1920 social media.
So yeah. Okay. I'm up to speed.
Oh yeah, like there's a lot more to his life than what I'm talking about. I'm really hitting the gross highlights, that are just like what. So, due to his failing health at 69 years old, he would be transferred to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. Probably not far from where old Gypsy Rose was at Chillicothe. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Just kidding. Not the same time. I'm just making a joke. That was an awful joke. That didn't even make any sense.
Oh, I was here for it.
Thank you. See, that's why we're best friends.
Exactly.
You laugh at all my dumb jokes.
Because I get them.
I
think they're hilarious.
You get me.
I do.
So he would try to get permission to publish his History of Prisons, aptly called Looking Outward, a history of the U.S. prison system from colonial times to formation of the Bureau of Prisons. It was scathing, and the Springfield warden sent his request to the director of Federal Bureau of Prisons in Washington, D.C., who refused his request to offer his manuscript for publication because it was talking about like inmates having to perform surgery on the other, like all these accusations. Some of them were true.
Oh, no doubt.
But some of them were really made up. And so the director said that Stroud's manuscript aroused prurient interest in homosexual activity and libeled the reputation of some guards whom Stroud described as sadistic, and libeled some wardens who Stroud described as incompetent or corrupt. So despite his popularity from both the book and the film based on his life, he would never be released. He would always be known as having a superior intellect who became a first-rate ornithologist and author, but was an extremely dangerous and menacing psychopath, disliked and distrusted by his jailers and fellow inmates. And he would die in 1963 at the age of 73 of natural causes in his cell. But prior to the conclusion of the lawsuit, he fought against the prison system to get his manuscripts published. His lawyer ended up getting all his manuscripts at the end, and he couldn't get those published either because all the publishing houses were like, "No, we're gonna get sued, dog."
That's a no-go for us.
But some of the manuscripts have been published in 2014, not all of them. So I don't know all about that. I was like, I don't know if I want to hear these mad ramblings because they said, even though he was above average intelligence, they said his writing was horrendous.
Shocking.
I already have a hard time with my own horrendous writing, okay?
Did it look like chicken scratch? Bird.
So I'm going to talk about a couple more, but these are less in-depth as the Birdman, just because the Birdman was like ridiculous. So we're going to talk about Alvin Creepy Carpus. He was nicknamed Creepy for his sinister smile and called Ray by his gang members. He led the gang along with Fred Barker and Arthur Doc Barker. There were only 4 public enemies ever given the title of Public Enemy #1 by FBI, and he was the only one to ever be taken alive out of those.
That's a lie because I also have that title, and I...
Well, first of all, they ain't taking you alive. You still on the land, baby.
Baby, right here.
So...
You thought I was going to drop real knowledge on you
I was
for
like,
a second.
Whoa, tell me more. But it really was real knowledge, though. It really was.
What accurate.
Very accurate. So he would become the longest serving inmate at Alcatraz at 27 years. 27 years on that island in your little old dinky box, cold as shit.
I mean, you probably get used to the cold after a while.
Probably. I mean, their hearts were probably already cold, so.
Yeah. After a while, you're probably like, can y'all turn the air down? It is hot in here. That is if your name is Jennifer.
Well, find out where he lives after this. This is funny. So he's born in Quebec in 1907 to Lithuanian immigrants, and he began his life in crime at the ripe age of 10.
Good for him.
Good for you. Good for
really,
you.
Started his career early.
And he run with pimps, bootleggers, and gamblers, just like you do, Becky.
Do like I do.
And it would earn one of his mini arrest. So this arrest, like one of the first arrests that he got, would lead him to meeting Fred Barker of the Barker Gang, which became the Karpis Barker Gang.
Which is covered in an earlier episode.
It is. So if you don't know or haven't heard that one, listen, obviously. Second, it was a formidable criminal gang of the 1930s. They did not hesitate to kill anyone who got in their way, even innocent bystanders. He was considered the brains of the operation and was said to be super intelligent. In 1934, he actually had his fingerprints removed by a doctor, which was quite elevated thinking for a criminal of the time. So on May 1st, 1936, the FBI located Karpis in New Orleans, and Herbert Hoover flew there to be in charge of the arrest. Shortly after 5 p.m. on May 2nd, as a dozen or so agents swarmed over Karpis's car, Hoover announced to Karpis that he was under arrest. And I'd be like, sir, I wasn't obvious.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
This would be the end of the Depression-era gangs, as most had died, were in prison, or like Capone would end up, also spent some time on Alcatraz, just ate up with syphilis.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Good times.
Good times.
Good times.
He had some real good.
Jimmy's Fun Facts. If you ever find yourself out in Las Vegas visiting the Zach Bagans Haunted Museum, you may have an opportunity to get intimate with some of Al Capone's personal belongings. Inside a room in the museum, you can find and interact with a dresser, mirror, and rug which belonged to Al Capone. Al Capone was an avid cigar smoker, and you can still see burn marks from cigar ash all throughout the rug, which you can physically walk on, by the way. While not originally meant to sit on the floor, Zach Bagans decided that everyone deserved the chance to walk on the same surface that the notorious gangster walked. And don't worry, you can't contract syphilis that way.
I would have known you were going to cover these people, because I bought a book from there of the most infamous inmates.
Did you?
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
Yes.
Well, he's the only other one that I really went in depth, and then I just went, doot. I was like, by then I was like, this is getting really long.
Well, they were short little stories about them.
Yeah, I do want to go back through them, though. It would be cool to do like a whole compilation episode, because the Depression-era gangsters are really cool.
Yeah.
In April 1962, with Alcatraz in the process of being closed, he was transferred to McNeil Island Penitentiary in Washington State. While at McNeil, he met a young Charles Manson. He wrote about Manson in his autobiography with Robert Lisey in 1980. This kid approaches me to request music lessons. He wants to learn guitar and become a music star. Little Charlie. He's so lazy and shiftless. I doubt if he'll ever put the time in required to learn. The youngster had been into institutions all his life. First orphanages, then reformatories, finally federal prison. His mother, a prostitute, would never around to look for after him. I decide it's time someone did something for him. And to my surprise, he learns quickly. He has a pleasant voice and a pleasing personality. Although he's unusually meek and mild for a convict. He never has a harsh word to say and is never involved in even an argument. This is a criminal saying that about another criminal. He's a real angel. It's like when people die and they're like, you know what? They lit up a room.
Right? They were
y'all lying.
Yeah. I knew her. She didn't light up shit.
She lit houses on fire, baby.
That was it.
Lit people's lives on fire. So Karpis was released on parole in 1969 and deported to Canada. Although he initially had difficulty obtaining his passport because his fingerprints were removed. During this time, he wrote an autobiography, The Alvin Karpis Story. And then he moved to Spain in 1973. Let me go from cold to hot.
Mm-hmm.
On August 26, 1979, he died by what was originally ruled a suicide by authorities, as sleeping pills were found in his body, but it was later ruled a death by natural causes. Livesey, who co-wrote Karpis's book, said that Karpis was not the type to commit suicide. He was a survivor. He spent 33 years in prison. And then he also stated that he was anticipating the publication of his book. So he believes that Karpis had been introduced to pills and alcohol by first of all, I know pills were around back in them days. So you cannot be blaming the old girl, okay? But that he overindulged from her. It's her fault. It's definitely not Karpis's. There was no autopsy performed, and he had been buried the next day in San Miguel Cemetery in Malaga, Spain. So there are quite a few other notable inmates. So instead of going through each history, here's a little brief summation of some cool ones. Creepy Karpis's bestie, Doc Barker, would also be in Alcatraz, but would die in escape attempt. Many think his ghost actually remained. He was the only one in his escape attempt that died too, which is kind of like, ooh. So Capone was actually scouted when Alcatraz opened as they searched for the most notable inmates to help bolster the new prison's reputation. Like, they literally had a guy that they called the scout of Alcatraz to look for just high-end fucking criminals. But as stated before, by the time he made it there, he was several cars short of a full deck due to syphilis. And he also died believing he was haunted by a previous associate who had died in the St. Valentine's Massacre, which was ordered by Capone. Then you got Machine Gun Kelly, George Barnes. He would spend a spell there, but was considered a model prisoner and would be transferred to Leavenworth. Mickey Cohen from the Mafia, worked for Mafia's gambling rackets. He was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 15 years. He would be transferred to Atlanta, where he would be beat with the pipe so bad he became partially paralyzed. Oh. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, which is this guy I want to write about. His nickname is Bumpy. He was affectionately called the Godfather of Harlem, and he was an African-American gangster, numbers operator, racketeer, and bootlegger in Harlem in the early 20th century. He was sent to Alcatraz in 1954 and was in prison until 1963, and he was believed to have been involved in one of the escape attempts. So that one's probably one more to check out later. So let's talk about the final years of Alcatraz. Oh my God, I know. You're tired of it. Not you.
Oh.
Not you, Becky. I'm talking about the listener.
Oh. I was like, I'm good.
You're like, no, I have a great time every time I do this. In his annual report for 1952, the Bureau of Prisons Director James Bennett called for a more centralized institution to replace Alcatraz. It was 3 times as expensive than any other prison due to its location and the harsh elements of the island. Its structural deterioration from exposure to salt spray would require $5 million to fix. And this is in 1952, so no small change. Major repairs began in 1958, but by 1961, engineers were like, nah, dog, this ain't even worth it. So between that and the escape attempt in 1962, Alcatraz would close on March 21st, 1963. So the final Bureau of Prisons report said of Alcatraz, the institution served an important purpose in taking the strain off the older and greatly overcrowded institutions like Atlanta, Leavenworth, and McNeil Island, since it enabled us to move to the smaller, closely guarded institution for the escape artists, the big-time racketeers, the inveterate connivers, and those who needed protection from other groups. There are many more ghost stories to be heard about Alcatraz. I know I touched on a few, but it really gives credence to the belief that the island itself is cursed. After all, the Ohlone sensed something long before it was a prison. It's not uncommon for visitors to hear moaning and crying in the cell blocks. The many who lost their lives on the rock of the island or the bay's cold water has to have left an indelible mark on the island. So, I mean, hell, you can even reportedly hear Capone learning how to play the banjo ghostly in the corridor. So anything's possible. There's tons of supernatural powers at bay. So right now, it's a museum and living ruin with thousands making the ferry trip to see the once dangerous corridors. Is it haunted? With that much strife, anger, and death, it has to have some kind of supernatural mark, but we never know. And that's a brief history of Haunted Alcatraz.
Love it. Great job.
Live, laugh, love. Ooh.
Fun.
It was only painful at the beginning. Guys, this is why I'm really rusty.
It's perfect segue into mine talking about prison.
Boy, we do love our prisons.
And the psychological effect it has on you being a guard or an inmate. So, you know.
Or on being a Becky in a prison.
Amen.
So you guys find us on our socials, Instagram, Facebook, all that jazz. Check out our merch. Let us know your own Too Close to Home stories. Have you been to Alcatraz? Did you feel something weird? Did you smell bird shit?
Share.
Don't forget to rate and subscribe on all platforms, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. We gain more visibility with you guys ratings and love the help if you would just take a moment to give us a review. And of course,
stay safe.
Keep your head on a swivel.
And don't bring it too close to home.
Or don't bring it too close to the bay. All right?
Either one.
Bye! If you enjoyed this episode of Too Close to Home, don't forget to rate and subscribe to us on most platforms. Follow us on our social media at Too Close Home Pod on Facebook, at Too Close Podcast on Instagram, or if you have your own Too Close to Home experience, shoot us your story at tooclosetohome@yahoo.com. Thanks for listening.